In continuing to look at the era of Reconstruction, we are now in the last section of this chapter, and you also have done the questions on page 348, to which we'll be adding the questions on the previous page. So, page 348, let's pass your paper to the person on your right. We will go through the questions and attempt to elucidate important items in addition as we go. Okay, number one. List at least 3 major scandals of the Grant administration. Stephen, give me one.
These are Hayden's answers. Credit revealer scandal.
Yes, that's one. What did you say before that?
These are Hayden's answers. Just in case it's wrong.
Tom. Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yep.
Give me a second one, Alex.
The whiskey ring.
Whiskey ring, right? Give me another one, Nate.
Tammany Hall.
No, that was not the Grant administration. Give me another one, Brady.
The Fisk-Gould gold scheme.
Yes, the Gould Fisk is usually how the order which is put, but that's okay. That is correct. And there's one more you could have had. Anybody have a different one? Alex?
The Secretary of War taking bribes.
Right, whose name was William Belknap. So there are 4 there. You can have had any of those 3. Any questions? 3 points. Stephen.
What about the gold market scandal?
Well, yeah, okay, that's the Gould Fisk
Alright.
scheme. So we'll take it under those terms. Let's see if there's anything. We're talking about an administration which was headed up by, of course, the most famous general at the time, Ulysses S. Grant. Oftentimes, a general has so much fame that they get propelled into office of president. Let's see if you can name some others. Who are some other generals who became president? Can you think of any?
Dwight Eisenhower.
Dwight Eisenhower. Yeah, after World War II, both the Democrats and Republicans were trying to get him to run for their party, and he ran as a Republican and was elected. Who else?
Zachary Taylor.
Right, Zachary Taylor.
George Washington.
George Washington, very first one. That's right.
Was McKinley a commander?
McKinley was in the Civil War, but he wasn't a general, I don't believe.
Oh, okay.
But he did have some fame from that.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt was not a general, but he did fight in the Spanish-American War with the Rough Riders, as you remember, and fighting in Cuba. Anybody else you think of? Okay, those are the ones that normally come to mind. Might be a couple more in there, but you can see that often happens. Unfortunately for Grant, although he was a great general and commander of men, he did not know much about politics. And as he is taking the office of the presidency, doesn't really know what he's doing. And so he allows the radical Republicans to essentially do whatever they want. And there's also been a lot of corruption that occurs in his government. It's interesting that one person said concerning him, or your textbook said concerning him, that he may be the worst president we've ever had. Woodrow Wilson later on said concerning Grant, he combined great gifts with great mediocrity. During his administration, a lot of people were using their positions to advantage to gain wealth for themselves, and so that way there's a lot of corruption took place. The first one was the credit mobilier scandal, which had concerned railroad, the Union Pacific Railway, and they were padding their expenses, so they were getting paid a lot more by the government for laying the rails than what they actually were using. And sometimes got the favor of government officials by selling them stock at lower prices than what their value was, and so they gained favor, and you know that's against the law. Then of course Fisk-Gould were people that tried to control the gold market by buying gold until the price rose, because you know when you buy something the price goes up, and when it got up to a certain point then they would sell it all, which would make the price plummet, but by then they had their money. But the problem they had was that in order to be successful, they had to make sure that the federal government wasn't selling gold. And so they took care of that with some bribes, and when Grant found out, he did order the Treasury to release gold for sale, and so the Fisk-Gould plan only partially succeeded, but they did get a lot of money from it. Then we had the Secretary of War, William Belknap, who received $24,000 in bribes for special licenses to sell goods to the Indians. And you'll find, if you watch many Westerns, every once in a while you'll see this issue cropping up, where people that are out there selling things were supposed to be taking care of the Indians as they're on reservations. You know, we get them to stop fighting, go on reservations, and now we're going to provide for you. But the food and clothing, blankets they provided were substandard. Oftentimes the blankets had holes in them. The food was rotten. Well, it started out okay, or the money was there, that was fine, but the Indian agent or someone along the way was pocketing the money and buying cheap stuff. And so some of the more scandalous things that took place concerning our dealing with the Indians, on top of everything else that we did to them. And then the whiskey ring had to do with whiskey distillers and distributors and conspiring to not pay their taxes. And so there was a lot of scandal going on. And as you know, not only in Grant's administration, but question number 2 takes us to scandal in New York. The question there is, who was the leader of the corrupt city government of New York during the Reconstruction period? Haley, who was that?
It says Henry Hall.
No, that was not the name of the person. Sally?
William Boss Tweed.
Yes, Boss Tweed was his name. The second part of the question is, what was his political party? Jessica? Right. So it wasn't just Republicans that were corrupt, Democrats too, especially in New York City. Alex?
If they said Boss Tweed, does that count?
Yeah, Boss, that was his name, his nickname, Boss Tweed. Tweed is the important part there. So 2 points on number 2. Boss Tweed, and he was a Democrat. That control of New York City went on for a long time, even after his death. And he did things like charge money for building hospitals and mental institutions and things like that, but they were never built. But he pocketed the money, he and his cronies pocketed the money. And he was allowed to get away with it because he could always deliver Democratic votes when it came time for New York elections. He eventually was arrested. Do you remember who was the man? Let's see, I think it's one of your questions. Who was the man that largely is responsible for bringing down Boss Tweed? It wasn't another politician or a policeman. Who was it? Lahana?
Thomas Nast,
Right, Thomas Nast. And who was he? What was he?
a cartoonist.
Yeah, can you imagine that? A cartoonist helps bring down a major political figure. Why? Because he kept putting in the cartoons all of what was happening. And so Boss Tweed was there a lot. What are you looking at?
Oh, yeah, it's look right there and then look right there. It's like white over there and it's like black over
Dark,
there.
yeah, storms.
Yeah.
Ooh.
He's scared.
All right, so And this kind of corruption has gone on for a while. It still is going on, especially you find it in major cities. Chicago is famous for the political corruption that was there for many years. I'm not sure if it, well, it seems to be in some ways anyway, especially when you look at the recent activities concerning the man who said that people attacked him because he was a black gay, and turns out he paid them to attack him. And then the prosecutor says, we're not going to prosecute, even though they're guilty of a lot of felonies. So that kind of stuff still goes on. I remember when I was a kid, I lived in Pennsylvania, hearing about the corruption in Philadelphia as being run by one guy. I still remember his name. It was Green, I think. All right. So that can happen in politics. That's why it's important for us to have a press that continually examines what's going on and keep us informed, and not to simply be centered on attacking one person, which is what's happening today. All right, the next question. Number 3, what were the 3 main campaign themes of the Democrats in 1876? Give us one, Caleb.
Southern Reconstruction.
Southern Reconstruction?
Uh-huh.
Well, what about it? What did they say about it? I mean, it was occurring, everybody knew it was happening, so what was the theme?
Reconstruction in the South.
Yeah, there was Reconstruction in the South. That was no great revelation to anybody. They couldn't campaign on, there's Reconstruction in the South. Everybody knew that, but what about it? What was the point? Who was in charge of Reconstruction in the South? What party? The Republican Party. So what are the Democrats saying about Southern Reconstruction? They're saying that there were a lot of abuses. So they're pointing out the abuses of Southern Reconstruction. If you don't have abuses, you miss the point. Anybody have abuses of Southern Reconstruction? Okay, all of you missed the point. It's not just that there's Southern Reconstruction. Yeah.
Is that in the book anywhere?
Yeah, it just listed the 3.
Yeah, just said here are the 3 things.
I mean, if you Googled it, okay. Joking, I think.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
it says Southern Reconstruction.
What page?
345. It's the very start of election of 1876.
Uh-huh.
It even says it's the themes.
Ah, okay. Well, your book should have been more explicit then. All right, I guess we'll take Southern Reconstruction, although you understand my point.
No.
That's like saying Trump is president. That's the theme. Well, I guess it kind of is, but what about it? Well, that Trump is colluded with the Russians, or Trump should be impeached, whatever. Trump is a nasty guy. All right, so Southern Reconstruction then we'll take for 1. What's the second one, Sally?
Republican corruption.
Right, Republican corruption, which is obvious. There was a lot of that going on. And what's the third one then, Alex?
Economic depression.
Right, which was true. All right, so those are the 3 issues. That's worth 3 points then. Number 4, what did Southern Democrats promise in the Compromise of 1877? Now, leading up to this, we have an election where Grant does not run again. Grant is reelected because the Democrats just couldn't put together anybody that could draw people away to vote for them instead of Grant. But there was a tradition not to run for a 3rd term. Where did that start?
George Washington.
George Washington. So no president after Washington ever ran for a 3rd term until FDR. He threw tradition aside, not only ran for a 3rd but 4th. Why are you guys wearing earrings? This is not Pirate Day.
It's the Rogan.
Look into the origin of men wearing earrings.
Yeah, I
See if you really want to do that.
yeah, it means
That's
you're,
homophobic.
Means you look bad.
yeah.
All right. Next. Yeah, get your ass here.
I mean,
The Republicans chose another general from the Civil War, Rutherford B. Hayes. He also had been in charge of Reconstruction, or one of the military zones of the South during the Reconstruction, and had been governor of Ohio, and was, above all, an honest person, which the Republicans really needed, and the country really needed. The Democrats nominated Samuel Tilden, who was a lawyer and former governor of New York. He had been the one who broke the Tweed ring in New York City, and so he seemed to be an excellent candidate. So the contest was really close. It came down to a few disputed states. Now, Tilden was only 1 point away, 1 electoral vote away from being president, with several states that weren't sure about the counts, because there were, in Florida, I think was the worst of it, there were 2 sets of electoral votes, and both sides, either side claimed one of them, and it was difficult to figure out. So it looked like Tilden was elected president. All he needed was 1 electoral vote from one of those states, or one of those states to go for Tilden. So the question is that compromise was reached by Southern Democrats, and what was that? What was the compromise? Or what was the promise of the Southern Democrats? Lydia?
They would help Hayes by allowing electoral votes to be counted.
So basically they said, okay, we'll let Hayes be president. We won't fight the electoral votes. And so Hayes goes from being behind, and Tilden only needs 1 vote, to Hayes wins. If you read articles about this, you find there's a lot of controversy over that whole thing. And was there corruption in the counting of the votes, and even arriving at the electoral votes? And you'll find that there seems to be corruption on both sides in the whole thing. But the Southern Democrats conceded for Hayes to be the winner, but then what did the Republicans promise? What was the Republican promise? Sarah?
To remove federal troops from the South.
Right. Get the federal troops out of the South. So 2 points for number 4. The Southern Democrats promised to allow the electoral votes to be counted so Hayes could be elected. And then secondly, the Republicans promised to withdraw the last remaining federal troops from the South. Any questions? All right, number 5. What was the effect of the Civil War and Reconstruction on Southern voting as a whole region? What happened? How did the South vote after this? Jill, what do you have?
It says the effect of the Civil War Reconstruction in the South was slaves were freed, the South became solidly Democratic, and the cause of the federal government expanded dramatically.
Okay, there's a lot of things included in the answer. The most important part of that, and what you need here, is that the region voted almost exclusively for the Democratic Party. It was known as the Solid South. They would always vote Democrat. And they did so up until 1973. It was the first time that the entire South voted for a Republican, and that was for Richard Nixon. Since then, because the Democratic Party became more liberal, and that's what caused the change in '73, and to an extent a little bit before that, because the Democratic Party had become more and more liberal and moved away from the principles that they once held. As Ronald Reagan once said, "I didn't leave the Democratic Party left me." And people in the South recognized that and began to turn to the Republican Party as the place where conservative values were held, as opposed to the liberal tendencies of the Democratic Party. So that's the effect on Southern voting. And certainly other things mentioned there are true as well. All right, do you have any questions about number 5? The answer you have there. All right, count up the number of points on both page 341, I think it was, and 348. On 341, we had 6 points. And on 348, we have 11 points. Yes.
The number 2 on this page.
Number 2 was worth 2 points. Yes.
Wait, for number 2, I had Harry's at Tammany Hall because
Had what?
it was like top Tammany Hall
Tammany Hall?
because
I
it
didn't
said
copy it all.
that it was run by the Democratic Hall guy under the direction, so is that wrong? 'Cause
Tammany Hall is a place. Number 2 is asking who is the leader.
it's a place.
Yeah, Tammany Hall is a place.
Oh, okay, I took it, it was in the city government of New York run by the Democratic Tammany Hall. Oh, I didn't think it was a place.
Oh, yeah, not
It
Hall
sounds like
as a person's
person.
last name, Hall as a place.
Place?
Yes.
Okay. Alright.
Like I'm going down to St. Jude's Hall.
Oh,
Alex,
For number 1, they had, the credit mobiler scandal, the whiskey ring, and then they said Tammany Hall. How many points off is it?
1. Tammany Hall's the only thing wrong there.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was like 3 points.
It's 3 points for number 1. Any other questions? All right, after I get your grades on this, I'm going to give you a take-home test on Reconstruction. So you may use your book to answer those questions, and you can begin as soon as we are finished, and I give it to you. And it'll be due to
We do Monday?
we don't have school on Monday, so it'll be due on Tuesday.
So, I have a question, because our exam's on Tuesday in here, so whatever we
Here's our
cover,
exam.
right?
Our exam.
Yeah, so it's Tuesday, so
Our
then,
exam is on Tuesday.
so whatever we cover in this section, is it not
Oh,
gonna be?
no, we do have class tomorrow. Yeah, we have class tomorrow, so it'll be due tomorrow, and then we'll review for the exam after we raise this test.
Actual test was.
Was the test originally today or tomorrow? Because on the board it says tomorrow.